All right, we got a flower arrangement and everything.
Beautiful, it's great. Yes.
Well, thanks everyone for being here. We know it's the end of the day, and so happy that we can close out the show with you guys. I don't know if either of us have ever missed a Breakpoint. I think we've been to just about all of them, and so we super appreciate the Solana team and the community that continues to propagate this and just gets more and more impressive every year.
And shout out to all the last people standing here.
Yeah, they're holding the fort down. Anyway, my name's Andrew Durgee. I'm co-CEO of Republic, but today is really not about me. It's about my good friend here, Yatsu. So, while Yat probably doesn't need really an introduction, why don't you give a little bit of background on just Animoca brands and just the absolute stalwart that it is within the industry?
I think most people know Animoca brands really, and thank you for the introduction, as really an investor in the space. But we're basically not a fund. Actually, we invest out of our balance sheet. Today, we have over 628 portfolio companies. A good number of them are in the Solana ecosystem. We've been known for Web3 gaming, back in the day. We still have 200 portfolio companies in gaming and growing, but we also invest in everything else, in DeFi, DePIN, AI, and that kind of stuff. And the way you can think of Animoca, since we've basically announced our go public plans, is essentially as a kind of altcoin index of sorts, right? Where we basically invest in the ecosystem for the long haul. And if you invest in Animoca, you have a way of playing the broader crypto Web3 altcoin space beyond Bitcoin, right? And of course, that means includes Solana, includes everything else in the ecosystem as well.
So maybe that's a great place to start. Why don't we dive deeper into, we're walking around, we're at a Solana conference, the alt versus Bitcoin conversation is pretty lively. And I think you have a really unique thesis, particularly how Animoca fits in it.
I don't know if it's a unique thesis, but my general perspective is that altcoins collectively are going to exceed the value of Bitcoin by a really, really large margin. Right? And I think the perspective is really the stock market versus gold. So Bitcoin is basically like digital gold. Gold today is a $27 trillion asset. Basically bigger than Apple, Google, Facebook, all those companies. But put together, actually, the top companies in the world are roughly 50 trillion in size. When you include the stock market, it's 128 trillion. When you include the private markets, that's close to $250 trillion. So roughly 10 times the value of gold, right? And why is that? Because people use Apple, they use Google, they use Facebook, they use these products, these services, right? And so what do we see in the token space? It's the same, right? People don't use Bitcoin. I think you all know that. But they do use altcoins, right? You use your Solana for gas fees to buy something, right? You use some tokens for gaming, you use some tokens for digital identity, you use some tokens for DeFi, for DePIN. This is basically altcoins, right? So altcoins is actually the engine of growth in crypto because we use them, right? And as a result, it makes sense that altcoins, like the stock market, is going to exceed in aggregate value of that. But of course, which altcoins, that's a different topic, right? But it's the question of basically the fact that we think altcoins will exceed in value in aggregate. So that means that we can expect a long way to go still for Solana in terms of value. Having said that, though, I think it's unlikely that Solana will exceed the value of Bitcoin because typically Bitcoin as the ultimate store of value has become almost like the crypto piggy bank, right? So you make money basically with your token ecosystems and you save it in Bitcoin, sort of quasi, right? So the growth of altcoins actually benefits Bitcoin. So for all obviously we're in the Solana conference, so we don't have any Bitcoin maxis here, I think. But for those Bitcoin maxis that are out there, right, the message really is that actually things like Solana and altcoins is actually good for Bitcoin.
And I think you even drove it further, right? You've started to look at all these different altcoin ecosystems and how to bring them together and aggregate them, maybe even as a further strategy, and to leverage a lot of the tech that's been built that maybe they just haven't been able to grow it and expand it in a way that they were anticipating.
And I think the unique perspective around, especially when you think about L1, L2s and the ecosystem, is the open, permissionless nature of crypto and blockchain means that essentially value can freely flow across each other, which also means that how do you retain value and network effects becomes more challenging, but also more competitive. So that means that there's true competition and true capitalism at work in crypto, which isn't the case basically when you think about Web2 companies. If you're building on Facebook or on Google or on Apple, you're building in closed ecosystems. They can shut you out any time, but at the same time, also you depend on them for value. Whereas over here, you can basically sort of move and transfer value even across chains if you wanted to, which necessitates that essentially the chains and the ecosystems in play have to do more to retain you, right? Which I think is actually a better outcome for everyone.
And just innately, chains don't die.
Correct.
Right? They just
live. The data construct is a great example. That's right. Yeah.
I think I'd be remiss if we didn't talk about Web3 gaming and media. I mean, like you are top 3 in the space when it comes to investing and innovating. And through this variety of different breakpoints we've been to, sometimes gaming's at the forefront, sometimes less so.
Sure.
And we were just at lunch talking about this the other day as I was kind of picking your brain further. And I think that kind of sharing that even here is like really interesting is what's your view on it? He's insanely bullish on Web3 gaming. And so like that's like a really good Kool-Aid, I think, to pour around the table.
I mean, first of all, yes. I mean, we've been probably when it comes to gaming, we're probably the biggest investor in Web3 gaming. We've obviously cut our teeth early with things like Sandbox, Axie Infinity, OpenSea, and all that kind of stuff. But I would say the way to think about Web3 gaming, I think when we say GameFi, I think many people in the industry, particularly the ones who came from Web 2, Web 3, made a general mistake. And the mistake is that they're translating essentially Web 2 gaming experiences and just translating them into Web 3, sort of, let's call it direct parallels, which, from a skeuomorphic perspective is essentially a nice add-on. It's understood, but it's not the final product, right? By that, I mean, for instance, skins in gaming is NFTs, sort of virtual currencies like tokens, you sell them, sure, there's an element around that. But actually, it's much more than that, right? And when we say GameFi, we actually say it's more about the gamification of finance, of which you can wrap a gaming layer around it, but there's essentially that element. Like, for instance, things like prediction markets, right? Like Polymarket, for a lot of people, is a game in and of itself, right? And if you think about what's happened in the world of finance, if you look at Robinhood and eToro and all the other trading platforms, actually, it's a game. There's leaderboards, there's social rankings, right? And why is that? Because most of us probably in this room and people who are watching this are actually gamers already. Gaming is part of your culture. It's actually the way that we speak to each other, right? And my parents' generation would not look at trading as a game, right? And they would certainly not be looking at prediction markets other than from the gambling perspective. It's not necessarily fun for them, right? But for people who are on these trading platforms, it's fun, right? It's entertainment in and of itself, right? And that's actually what it means to gamify something. And so the lens of gamification as an extension of gaming culture into all products and services, which in crypto really means primarily finance for the time being, is essentially how you bring in Gen Zs into the world of finance, and thereby also teaching them about financial literacy. Now, that doesn't mean that crypto gaming isn't going to be big for entertainment purposes, owning your assets and trading them, but like NFTs, right? NFTs itself, for instance, is an expression of that as well. You have ownership, but what's the benefit of ownership? Well, you can trade it, and you can sell it, and you can lend it, and you can do other stuff. And that in and of itself becomes fun as well, right? Of course, you can do more, but that's kind of an example of that. While we're bullish on gaming, and I just want to give a macro picture on gaming, gaming has had a tough couple of years, right? I think post-COVID, everyone thought gaming would increase. It actually went flat and slightly low. And its biggest competitor, macro for gaming, isn't actually the sort of the fact that, well, there's some demographics, but the biggest actual competitor is TikTok. And what TikTok has really done is essentially...
Is it just attention? Is that what they're just competing for screen time?
It's attention, but ultimately what really gaming is a social platform, right? It's about social attention. There's something in gaming that we call Bartle's taxonomy. And that's how we divide essentially the type of people who play games, right? So, roughly 10% are what we call adventurers, 10% are basically achievers, right? Those are the people who want to level up and want to get really good. Roughly 1% are called killers. Those are the people who are psychopaths in games and want to kill everything. And then roughly 80% are actually what we call socializers. They play the game for social reasons. So you ask if you have kids, and they play Roblox, which is the biggest game in the world, but 340 million users. 340 million users, right? Why they play games? Chances are it's because my friends are, right? So then, and of course, it's UGC content that basically adds that additional layer of that social engagement layer. So it's social. And TikTok has been essentially eroding much of that social layer to them and essentially taking competition away, not just from Instagram, but also from gaming, right? So what tokens do is they represent, in many ways, the mimetic and the market of attention of gaming. Like AI tokens are a great example. They were really big last year, but it wasn't because AI tokens had massive adoption. It's because AI was hot as a topic, and it was reflected in the market prices of tokens, much like the stock market would reflect on topics like that as well. And so we need a catalyst for gaming as well that takes over macro market narratives, and that's GTA 6. So our prediction is that when GTA 6 finally launches, which has been delayed and delayed and delayed, now to November of next year, then essentially we'll see a big moment in Web3 gaming tokens as well. However, that won't happen until next year if they don't delay again.
So that becomes a very big catalyst moment then.
I think it comes in a catalyst moment for attention,
Yeah.
right? And then from that attention come other areas. For instance, GTA 6 has, so GTA has RP servers,
Right.
role play servers. What it means is you can build essentially your own sort of basically mods on top of basically GTA 6. And there's a big other catalyst, which is basically the Clarity Act next year. And the Clarity Act, which most people will believe will be approved, I think you might think of doing it in U.S. Congress, basically gives a very clear clarity, no pun intended, perspective on what is a utility token, as in essentially a digital commodity under the CFTC, and what would be a security. And this is the barrier to allow other gaming companies to go and think about, how do I launch a token? Like if you're a Take-Two or Activision or EA or one of those big companies, you're not going to launch a token until you have clarity, right? And think what happened about the Genius Act. The moment the Genius Act was announced, Facebook and Amazon and Walmart, we're doing a stablecoin, right? They wouldn't be able to do this before. And I think the same is with Clarity Act. And then that's where we'll see an impetus of tokens launching or being announced or being planned for, right? And that also means that you'll have a relaxation of many gaming companies, big ones, who will say, actually, we can now have a token because it's not actually something that is problematic from a legal perspective, whereas before it would have been.
We used to always tell our gaming advisory clients that a token won't necessarily make your game, but it could kill it.
Yes.
And you have to be very careful.
On the other side as well, exactly.
Yeah.
And I think that's also because when you look at the token as that speculative asset, which in many cases, because they've raised capital through that, it's part of the problem. But if you're a large gaming studio, you don't necessarily need to raise money from the token. It becomes a social engagement layer, and it becomes a way. I mean, look at, for instance, CS:GO, basically Counter-Strike skin trading, right? At its peak, it's a $6-7 billion sort of market cap, which they then killed themselves because they didn't like it, right? That's the risks of centralization. But the point is, people do trade them in high volumes because they do believe their gaming assets have value.
You had mentioned ownership, which is digital ownership, is something that both Yat and I, you guys are just experiencing me and him having lunch, by the way. This is just,
we're just having a
really
chat.
just what's just happening. But you guys are probably seeing around the venue that Animoca is tokenizing their equity, which is really, eating
On
your own
Republic.
dog food on Republic and on Solana.
That's right.
Which we couldn't be more excited about that partnership. But this is kind of the evolution of equity that we've all kind of been waiting for, I think, industry-wide, and you're often the leader in innovation. It's happening now again. I'd love for you to talk a little bit about why that's interesting to you, why you guys are excited about that, and why you're making that step forward.
So first, I just want to paint a general lens on tokenization, right? The message to the whole world is tokenize or die, okay? And there's a couple of reasons behind that.
I got to add that to the website.
Yeah, exactly, totally. Tokenize or die, right?
Yeah, that's good.
And by the way, this is no different than every evolution, right? I mean, most of you are probably too young to remember. I think you're all maybe under the age of 30, right? But in my generation, we used to have this thing called digital literacy. And for those people who were not going online, they lost against the competitor who was online. And for the person who actually used Facebook, they lost to the company that was using Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, social media, LinkedIn, whatever naming convention you would put. If you were not on Google, you were not discoverable. You had Yellow Pages. I mean, do you know what Yellow Pages are, right? I mean, that's kind of sort of the lens, right? And now tokenization is doing exactly the same thing. If your competitor in your business tokenizes and you don't, you will lose to the company that tokenized, because they have new financial constructs, new elements they can grow from, and new possibilities that the competitor simply doesn't have. Now, also, it's market reach. Think just about stablecoins. Stablecoins today has about 150 to 200 million more people around the world in Africa, South America, Southeast Asia, Pakistan. Name the country that typically would be considered unbanked that now has a US dollar. That means that if you don't accept tokens, those customers cannot become your customers. But your competitor that is tokenized or has token economies can tap them into it. So that's one area of that potential, right? And the second point is that tokens and crypto generally is the asset class of the youth. For instance, young people in South Korea predominantly trade crypto, and they would prefer crypto assets over traditional stocks. That's not to say stocks aren't valuable, it's just that it's not the medium of their preference. And if we believe that we're all going to be basically having stuff in our Phantom wallet and MetaMask and whatever, then you want to have your stocks and your equities also in that form, which has to be tokenized, right? So in order to sort of, this idea of tokenizing our equity is actually just reaching to new audiences, to wider audiences around the world we would not normally reach, but also basically to the audience of the next generation. And if you want to know where the future is going, then look at what the young people are doing, right? So, because they're the youth. Old guys like me, eventually we're going to die. The young people who are going to grow up are going to be in my position and whatever, right? I mean, it's kind of clear, right?
Yeah.
And we see this evolution happening time and time again. And the final point I would say, when you talk about agentic AI, basically, what is the asset class that they're going to be trading 24/7? It's tokenized assets.
It has to be
right?
digital.
It has to be digital, tokenized assets. And you're not going to trust billions of dollars of transfer on a centralized platform that can shut it off anytime. So the immutability, the permissionlessness, right? That's all critically provided by blockchains like Solana, and basically AI agents can trade with each other and do stuff basically through that format. So basically, that's why we are excited about what you're doing by tokenizing the equity, because it reaches those audiences, extends the market, and ultimately in the future, when an AI agent has to buy some equity and says, which company should I buy? Oh, maybe there's Animoca because it happens to be tokenized, whatever it is. I mean, it's no different than when you're a retailer and you decided to finally launch your product on Amazon, right? Or if you were a media company and you finally decided to launch an app on the App Store.
Yeah.
Why did you do that? To reach audiences and customers and stay competitive. It's the same.
I always like to say that every 16-year-old on the planet has existed in a world where Bitcoin has existed.
Exactly.
And that is, that's...
And they are digitally native.
That's right.
I mean, I'm a digital immigrant, right? But my children are digitally natives, right? And it's their culture, it's what they understand, and it's also in that gamified culture as well.
Yeah. And if anyone who's interested, republic.com/Animoca, where you'll be able to have a piece of this unbelievable company. And maybe just to close out here, what does tokenization of equity mean, you think, for the Solana ecosystem, right? How will it amplify the Solana ecosystem?
I mean, Solana talks about the vision, internet capital markets, right?
Yeah.
And what is internet capital markets without equities? I mean, simply put, right? I mean, equities today, both public and private, represent something like, in total, probably $200 to $300 trillion, right? We talk about how RWAs is like, oh, there's $30 billion in RWAs, or maybe 40 billion. It's amazing. Yes, it's amazing, but it's a drop in the ocean when it comes to the entire equity markets in the world, which is like $900 trillion, right? So we're celebrating some successes, but it's still a very, very small sliver of where things are, right? So what it means for the Solana ecosystem is that you're growing up. Right? It means that you're going from, and meme coins and stuff will always be part of Solana. Right? I think of, by the way, meme coins and utility tokens actually as onboarding to financial literacy, right? Because securities in the equity side, just because there's a token, doesn't make it not a security, right? That means you have to do the KYC, the AML, the qualifications, all that kind of stuff. But you can do this at the wallet level. You can do this with Republic, with platforms. That'll all happen. But everyone in this room generally understands money and finance. But I would wager that within your network of friends that you have, if you were to query them, and if you're not a total degen only hanging out with traders, right, that probably 90% of the community barely trades or doesn't even know what a token is or doesn't own any equity. So the global statistic is that less than 10% of the world actually owns equities. Take away Abu Dhabi and New York and London, right? Of course, it includes people that are unbanked, right? And I think the statistic is that I think sort of 9 out of 10 people or 8 out of 10 people when they graduate from college feel unprepared for the world of finance, right? And it's clear. People around the world, the ones who understand money are the ones who invest have done well. The ones who don't understand money and don't invest have done poorly. I mean, that's the statistic, right? As simple as that, right? And that's because they haven't been onboarded to the world of finance. And I think meme coins, utility tokens, are actually the onboarding mechanism. Maybe it's fun, maybe it's entertaining, but you learn from that. And then once you understand that, and you can then start to onboard into the securities areas and say, okay, so what is a PE ratio? Or what's the fundamentals around the business? And where does it make profit? And understanding that, and then basically onboard them towards that path. And so the parallel I like to give is things like Pokemon cards. So how do children learn about money? Not from school and not from college, unless you go into economics, and that's even debatable. But if you have Pokemon cards, you start trading them, right? And you start learning about what's valuable and what isn't valuable, right? And think about your own experience of how did you learn about money. It didn't go because you went through a finance degree. That's reserved for a small sliver of 0.1% of the world. You learned it through some activity that you liked or were engaged in or did something, right? And I think that's basically what the future of tokenization does. And I think for the Solana blockchain, it was responsible and remains responsible for onboarding millions and millions of people essentially into some early form of financial literacy, even if the critics will say it's gambling, and some of it, of course, is, right? But people will learn about money because they're related and connected to that. And then from that evolution, you want to go to the next thing, and that would be basically equities and commodities and other things that you can obviously buy on Republic.
So the front door for financial education. That's really
And
what we're
financial
looking at.
literacy, absolutely.
Yeah, amazing. Well, guys, we really appreciate you. I know this is the last session, but thank you so much.
Thank
Yeah.
you. Okay. Good.